I shouldn't have been there. The tiger was less than 20 meters away from me, lying on hard-packed dirt, struggling to breathe. Every time his chest rose, it felt unnecessary, as if his body had already decided to stop, but something inside him was still forcing it to continue. People were shouting behind me. Someone grabbed my arm, begging me to step back. Another voice screamed for everyone to stay away, but the tiger wasn't looking at them. He was looking at me. The village sat at the edge of the forest, simple houses, low walls, narrow dirt roads. There were no proper fences, no rescue teams, no infrastructure capable of dealing with an animal like that. Only people fear and years of forced coexistence with something that never should have been there. The tiger had been trapped in that place for 7 years, not in a zoo cage, not in a sanctuary, trapped because he could no longer leave. His body told the story. Visible ribs, dull fur, one of his back legs twisted at an unnatural angle, completely motionless. The smell of infection mixed with the heavy afternoon heat. That place wasn't keeping him alive. It was only delaying the end. I was a doctor, human, clinical, American. I was in India on a short mission treating people from the village. Children with simple infections, elderly men and women with old familiar pain. Nothing that could have prepared me for this. Someone said the tiger hadn't moved for days. Another said he had stopped eating. A third swore he only seemed calmer when someone stayed silent near him. I stepped closer, not like someone facing a wild animal, but like someone entering a room where someone is dying. The tiger blinked slowly. He didn't growl, he didn't try to escape, he just kept breathing, as if he were waiting for something. If this story has already drawn you in, take a moment to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments which city and country you're watching from. It truly helps the channel continue. I sat down on the ground at a safe distance. I spoke without carefully choosing words. I spoke in English, then more quietly, almost in a whisper. Not for the tiger, for myself. I talked about things no one there knew. Why I had left my country. An old mistake. Someone I couldn't save. The tiger closed his eyes for a few seconds. When he opened them, they were still fixed on me. And in that moment, I understood something that scared me more than his size. He wasn't there by chance, and neither was I. Someone behind me said the forest police were on their way. Darts, ropes, a truck. The village began to relax. People were already speaking as if everything had been solved. But I looked at the tiger again. At the way his breathing had slowed, at the effort behind every minimal movement, and with unsettling clarity I knew, if we waited he wouldn't survive. Help was coming, but it was coming too late. And for the first time since I arrived in India, I realized I would have to do something that wasn't in any protocol, something no doctor is supposed to do. The village wasn't built to wait. The sun rose too quickly, and the heat spread through the narrow streets like an invisible weight. People shifted restlessly, whispering, pointing. The silence that once felt like respect was slowly turning into fear. Someone said the tiger had attacked animals before. Another claimed children could no longer leave their homes. A man shouted that this should never have been allowed. The problem wasn't the tiger, it was time. Every minute he lay there, the place became more unstable. There was no way to isolate the area. Houses were too close, streets were too narrow, and the more people arrived to watch, the less control anyone had. Behind me, someone said out loud, "If he gets up, someone is going to die." I knew that wasn't an exaggeration. An old forest police jeep appeared at the end of the road, kicking up dust. 2 officers stepped out, armed, scanning the scene carefully. They spoke quickly to each other, judging distances, pointing at the tiger's body, at the houses, at the people surrounding us. One of them asked who I was. When I said I was a doctor, American, I saw the look change, not to relief, to suspicion. I explained that the tiger was severely weakened, that there were clear signs of infection, that his lack of reaction wasn't aggression, it was exhaustion. I explained that the tiger was severely weakened, that there were clear signs of infection, that his lack of reaction wasn't aggression, it was exhaustion. I told them that sedating him there, in the middle of the village, could send him into shock. They exchanged glances. "He's a living risk," one of them said, "and the village can't afford that." Their plan was simple: sedate, restrain, remove. The problem was that the tiger's body didn't seem capable of surviving any of those steps. While we argued, something changed. The tiger began to move. He didn't try to stand. He dragged his body a few inches across the ground, every movement heavy with effort, and slowly turned his head toward me. The movement was small, almost unnoticeable, but it was enough to silence everyone. He stopped when he was aligned with me, took a deep breath, and stayed there. One of the officers noticed. "He only reacts when you move," he said quietly. The words caused immediate discomfort. I hadn't touched the animal. I hadn't done anything except be there. And yet somehow he had chosen me as a reference. And in that situation, that wasn't reassuring. It was a new problem. I tried to keep my voice steady when I said I couldn't simply walk away. I didn't explain everything. I didn't say that his gaze was stirring something old inside me. I didn't say that his labored breathing reminded me of nights in improvised hospitals, of patients who knew they wouldn't survive and waited anyway. I waited with them. I sat down again like before. I didn't move closer. I didn't touch him. I spoke softly. I told him he didn't need to move, that no one there was going to hurt him. The tiger closed his eyes for a few seconds. When he opened them, he was still there, waiting. One of the officers said reinforcements were on the way. A veterinarian, better equipment, a larger truck. The village relaxed again. Some people stepped back. Others started discussing where the tiger would be taken. But I noticed something no one else seemed to see. His breathing was slower, irregular. The body that had once been tense now looked too heavy even to react. I knew that pattern. It wasn't calm. It was the beginning of surrender. And in that moment, I understood that the greatest danger wasn't the tiger attacking someone. It was him dying right there, in the middle of the village, surrounded by people, waiting for help that would arrive too late. The veterinarian arrived late in the afternoon. He came in an old truck, covered in dust, carrying minimal equipment and the tired look of someone who had seen too many situations like this, in places like this. The crowd opened a path with expectation. Some believed this would finally solve everything. He approached the tiger carefully, checked the breathing. The crowd opened a path with expectation. Some believed this would finally solve everything. He approached the tiger carefully, checked the breathing, the condition of the injured leg, the open wounds, the way the body barely reacted at all. Then he stood up slowly. "He can't handle full restraint," he said. "Not heavy sedation either." People began to murmur. One of the officers asked what that meant. The veterinarian didn't hesitate. "It means that if we try now, he could die." The silence that followed was heavier than any scream before. The village began to darken. Dim lights turned on in nearby houses. Children were pulled indoors. Doors closed, but no one really left. Everyone wanted to see how it would end. The problem was that night brought new risks. Other animals could approach. The tiger could go into shock. Fear could turn into panic. The veterinarian explained that the only option was to stabilize him right there. Clean the wound? Administer fluids. Buy time. Here? Someone asked, incredulous. There was no alternative, but no one was ready for what that would require. That was when everyone looked at me, not because I wanted them to, but because I was already there. The veterinarian asked if I could place an IV under difficult conditions. Asked if I had done it outside hospitals without proper monitoring. I said yes, but never on a tiger. There was a moment of collective hesitation. One officer said it was madness. Another reminded everyone that I wasn't a veterinarian. They were right. Still, the veterinarian was blunt. If we do nothing, he won't make it through the night. I looked at the tiger again, at the way he was breathing, at his half-closed eyes, at a body too still for something that was still alive. And I understood that the decision wasn't about courage. It was about presence. I moved closer carefully. The veterinarian guided every step. People stepped back several meters. Silence returned, tense, almost suffocating. I spoke softly as I knelt down. I told him it would hurt a little. I told him he needed to stay still. I said the same things I used to say to human patients, even knowing they might not understand the words, only the tone. The tiger didn't react. He didn't try to escape. He didn't growl. He didn't move. When I touched his thick skin for the first time, I felt his body tremble slightly, not in attack, but in effort. He trusted me, and that hit me harder than any physical danger. The procedure took longer than it should have. We managed to clean part of the wound, administer basic fluids, lower the fever if only briefly. The veterinarian nodded, relieved. "We bought some time," he said. People started to relax. Some even smiled. Others were already talking about transferring him the next day. But I kept watching. The breathing was stable, too stable. The body was relaxed, too relaxed. The tiger wasn't getting better. He was shutting down. And in that moment, with my hands still stained with blood and dust, I realized that the hardest part of this story was still ahead. Night fully settled over the village. Improvised lights cast long shadows on the mud walls, and the tiger looked even larger under that uneven darkness. The air cooled slightly, but not enough to ease his condition. Each breath came slower, farther apart, as if his body were negotiating how much longer it could stay. The veterinarian stepped closer to me. "He responds better when you're nearby," he said quietly. "When you step away, his vitals worsen." It didn't sound like a compliment. It sounded like a warning. Because at that moment, the situation stopped being purely technical. It was no longer just about what could be done. It was about who he accepted near him as his body began to fail. And for a reason I still didn't fully understand, that person was me. As we waited through the night, one of the village elders approached. He spoke softly, as if the tiger could understand every word. He said the animal had appeared years earlier, still young, already limping as he came out of the forest. At first they tried to drive him away. Later they learned to keep their distance. Over time he stayed. He never attacked people. He never approached houses. He simply occupied that space between the village and the jungle. He always came back to the same spot, the man said, as if he no longer knew where else to go. As he spoke, the tiger opened his eyes for a brief moment. He didn't react to the sound. He reacted to presence. And I understood then that this place wasn't just where he had been found. It was where he had survived. The veterinarian pulled me aside. He said there was one last possibility. Not ideal, not recommended. Something he wouldn't put in an official report. An adjustment in dosage. A more aggressive attempt at stabilization. One that required someone to keep the animal calm throughout the entire process. "If he panics, it's over," he said. "And if he simply lets go, then it's over too." I asked if there was any other option. He shook his head. There was no perfect scenario in that forgotten village, only imperfect choices, and one of them had to be made now. I sat down near the tiger again, not close enough to be reckless, but close enough for him to know I was still there. I spoke again. I told him about the hospital where I worked before coming to India, about nights that lasted too long, about patients who held my hand, not because they believed they would survive, but because they didn't want to be alone at the end. My voice faltered at times. The tiger shifted slightly, not to flee, not to attack, just adjusting his body, like someone searching for a position that hurts a little less. The veterinarian gave me a signal. It was time. The administration was slow, controlled, silent. Each second felt stretched, as if time itself had decided to watch. The tiger took a deep breath, then another. His body trembled slightly, and for a moment I thought we had lost everything right there. But he didn't react. He didn't fight. He just kept his eyes open, fixed on me, until his eyelids grew too heavy to hold. When they finally closed, no one celebrated. The veterinarian exhaled slowly. "If he makes it through the next few hours, then maybe." Maybe wasn't a guarantee. And as the village slowly began to step away from the scene, I stayed there, sitting on the ground, knowing this still wasn't the end. Because some stories only reveal their true impact after the danger has passed. Dawn arrived slowly. The village began to wake while the tiger remained still, breathing irregularly but stable. The worst moment had passed. At least, that was what everyone kept whispering, as if saying it out loud might break something fragile. The rescue truck arrived shortly after. There were no cheers, no celebration, only people watching in silence as the massive body was carefully prepared for transport. The tiger seemed smaller now, not because he had changed, but because he no longer represented danger, only presence. When they lifted him into the vehicle, I felt something strange, as if that patch of ground had been occupied for so long that it now felt wrong to see it empty. I went to the recovery center the next day. The veterinarian greeted me with a fatigue that wasn't physical. He said the tiger had survived the night, that the infection was being controlled, that it would still take days to know whether his body would respond. He's not out of danger, he warned, but he hasn't given up. The tiger lay in the shade, inside a wide enclosure, far from the village. His eyes were open, alert, but there was something different in them. Not fear, not aggression, recognition. When I spoke, he shifted slightly. Nothing dramatic, just enough to show he was still there. I didn't stay long. I didn't try to touch him. I didn't try to create anything new. I knew that bond had formed out of necessity, not choice. And forcing its continuation would be selfishness disguised as care. The veterinarian walked me to the exit. He reacts when he hears your voice, he said, but less each day. That brought me an unexpected sense of relief. It meant he was learning to be okay without me. And somehow that was the best sign possible. Before leaving India, I passed through the village once more. Life had resumed. Children ran through the streets. Doors stood open. The place where the tiger had rested was now just bare ground. No marks, no signs, no visible memory. But I noticed something subtle. People spoke more softly there. They walked more carefully, as if that place had been crossed by something that demanded respect. Maybe it was just my imagination, or maybe it wasn't. On the day of my departure, I woke up early. As the car moved down the dirt road, I looked back one last time. The forest looked the same. So did the village. The tiger was far from there now. Safe, recovering, out of danger. I continued on my way. But I carried with me the certainty that that encounter hadn't been a mistake, nor an unlikely accident. Some connections aren't meant to last. They exist to make sure that no one, human or animal, has to face the end alone. I returned to that village a few days later. It was early. The sun was rising behind the trees and dust drifted slowly across the road with the wind. Houses were open. People came and went. Someone swept the front of a doorway. A child ran across the street. Everything looked normal. If someone arrived there without knowing the story, they would never imagine that on that very ground, a tiger had spent his last moments of strength. I stopped exactly where he had been. There were no marks on the soil, no sign of struggle, no trace of what had happened. As I stood there, I noticed something strange. People avoided that exact spot, not consciously. They just went around it, passed a few meters away, lowered their voices when they got close. An older man stopped beside me. He didn't come back, he said, as if it were obvious. But he didn't leave either. It took me a few seconds to understand. He wasn't talking about the tiger. He was talking about the feeling. Before leaving the country, I went to the sanctuary one last time. The tiger was better. Still limping, still fragile, but standing. He walked slowly through the open space, stopped in the shade, watched his surroundings with attention. When I approached the enclosure, I spoke very little. The same words, the same tone. He lifted his head. He didn't come toward me. He didn't growl. He didn't react like before. He just looked at me for a few seconds, long enough to feel intentional. Then he turned his body and walked away. I didn't feel sadness, nor joy. I felt something harder to name. Relief. Because that bond didn't need to continue. It had existed for exactly as long as it needed to. For the right reason. To prevent an ending from happening in the wrong place. The tiger no longer needed me, and I no longer needed to stay. When I left India, the road looked like any other. The village faded behind me. So did the forest. The world moved on. But sometimes, when I think about that place, I remember that not every unlikely encounter happens by chance. Some happen because someone, human or animal, has reached the limit, and for a brief moment finds presence where there was only abandonment. The place looked the same, but I knew it wasn't.